So what a treat this is. I was talking with someone earlier who was recounting a story about how they were at a gathering with a bunch of people and they were all introducing themselves, and Irwin introduced himself as a retired engineer. And Joan just said, "I'm with him." But this man, I mean, that standing ovation says so much about the love that this community has for you, Irwin. And it's certainly because you were an architect of the innovation revolution that's happened here, probably the prime architect in many ways, and an extraordinary philanthropist, civically engaged. You do retirement really badly, my friend.
I flunked retirement.
Yes. But you're also an extraordinarily nice human being. One of the people who has been friendliest to me since I arrived here 3 years ago, who has sort of been available to me every time I've wanted to ask, well, how do things work around this, is you. So the first question I want to ask you is, we actually talked this morning about how the times we're living in can feel mean at times and mean-spirited, and you're a nice person. And I just want to ask you, how did you get to be so nice, and how do you maintain it? I'm not joking.
Probably from being with my wife for many years. I shouldn't ignore my mother's influence as well.
Good. All right. Well, I love both of those answers. Let's talk a little bit about where San Diego is in its trajectory and how you feel we got here and where you see us going. You helped build this town into an innovation hub, and I think everybody recognizes that. I'm curious what you think were the conditions or mindset that made that possible here.
Well, it's interesting. We came here in 1966, and there was actually very little activity other than some government support companies. A few very large ones, but not very much on the civilian side. And I had just finished a book before I came from MIT on digital communication. So when I came, there were a lot of requests for consulting, and none of them from San Diego, other than the Navy laboratory, electronics laboratory. And so there really wasn't that much activity here. There was a lot up in LA, Orange County already, and Jet Propulsion Lab, which I had spent 9 months at a couple of years earlier. And so there just wasn't that activity here. There wasn't the consulting opportunities. And I usually did consult a day a week, just because it was for some money as well, but just because it was a good way to keep track of what was going on in industry. And when you're doing research or having students look at different problems and so on, it's usually good to have something that's more applicable to the real world than just pick something at random. So the consulting did support that kind of working with students. And by the way, I still recommend that faculty, when they have the chance, go out, consult, find out what really is going on. But in any case, that did change. Salk was already here, but still small. And UCSD was just beginning to grow. When I came, there were a few students. The first graduating class was not until 2 years later, at 68. And so there wasn't too many engineering people available if you were going to start a company to hire and work with. In any case, UCSD, I think, made a huge difference. And at the time, it was the research university. Now we have a few more universities and colleges that are doing appropriate training in STEM. But at the time UCSD did begin to build up, I started Linkabit actually in some sense accidentally, was because it's a consulting business, and mentioned it to two friends who are on the faculty at UCLA, Andy Viterbi, Len Kleinrock, and that there was much more at that time from the LA area, much more requests for consulting than I could handle. And they suggested, well, why don't we start a company and share the consulting? And so that's how the first company started. And it grew. We can talk about that a little further, but I think it was very helpful in the sense that there were many people that work starting with a very small company and then growing up and seeing how you can go from small to larger. And that, I think, trained a bunch of people. So when I left Linkabit to retire, which only lasted 3 months, a number of others who had worked with me at Linkabit, they'd also go out and start companies, and so it did begin to grow. And then, of course, the biotech area has expanded as well. So I think San Diego transformed from a place that was clearly beautiful and lovely, nice area to live in, but very little happening intellectually, to something much, obviously now, much more special. And that, I think, had made it a lot easier when the university was growing, Salk was growing, first companies were growing, that having a very nice place with generally very friendly people, because most of us came from elsewhere and were welcoming to new people, that allowed us to be able to attract people from elsewhere. So until the university began to build a bit, most of the people we actually brought in from elsewhere.
So would you describe the secret sauce then? And it's important for us to remember as we think about how a new generation of leaders keeps alive the tradition of innovation and entrepreneurship. Would you describe the secret sauce as continuing to be a place that innovators want to come and to have that gravitational pull that pulled in folks around you and your work?
You certainly want to keep that, and the way to keep it is, whether you have an ongoing company or a new company, is to be doing something that's exciting. At both Linkabit and then Qualcomm, the strategy was always, don't try to do something that's just a little better from what exists, but go out and try to find something that could make a difference. Harder to do that, and you can fail a number of times or redirect yourself, but by far that people like to work on new things that are hard, and that allows you to attract good people.
That, by the way, could be a motto for this entire conference. People like to work on new things that are hard. Yeah. And don't try to make things just a little better, but to move things significantly. I love both of those thoughts. So when you look at the innovation landscape today, or with AI, with what's happening with medical research and the life sciences sector, what excites you as you look around at the landscape that you see in San Diego, and what concerns you?
Well, first of all, a lot of this excites me. It's fun to see the technology continuing to move ahead. And that's important for all of us, because even if one doesn't work in the technology, it does add to the ability for people to find very good jobs and do interesting things. It improves the economy. You know, the economy over the years has mostly been driven by technology and good breakthroughs. A lot of things are happening now, including things that we don't anticipate at this point. I'm particularly excited about what's been happening in AI and robotics, in that I think that's going to have a much more rapid impact on our economy, on our productivity, than previous changes. You know, even the computer, when it came along, it became more useful, and then cell phones. Each of those had more than a decade before they got adopted and became really a way to improve one's productivity. I think this is going to happen more rapidly. And if so, we have to be prepared to think through how best to make use of that productivity. Most people have been worrying about loss of jobs. I would look at it as a way to have a shorter work week, actually. But to have that productivity, we're making all the goods that we need and services that we need to provide with fewer hours. How do we make sure that that increase in productivity goes across the whole population and is not just for those that can own the means? And so we have some challenges there. I'm hoping that it does have a major impact on the medical area as well. Right now, there is an emphasis on looking at devices, sensing devices that are useful, of course, in the hospital, but also to monitor health at home. And the ability to increase that digitization of medicine and monitoring, I think will have a huge impact, again, on all of our health. Rather than just reacting when something goes wrong, be able to get some indication that there is a problem coming, let's think how best to treat it. And so I think that is useful. Along with that are all these sensors that we're slowly developing that sense all kinds of aspects about not only our own body, but also the environment around us. And so perhaps we'll pick up pandemics earlier, we'll pick up various trends. Unfortunately, trends that include the warming weather and so on, but at least understand very much inputs from around the world that these sensors will pick up and, of course, communicate back by the cell phones.
You know, when I listen to you talk about these things, I am struck again by how dialed in you are on where the cutting edge is and what direction we're headed. And I remember actually something that struck me when you and I spoke on the Stop and Talk podcast a while back. I kept wanting to talk about the past, and you kept wanting to talk about the future. It was really striking. And I'm curious to know where your leadership philosophy came from and how you have translated it from being a business leader to being a philanthropic leader and a civic leader in the way that you have.
Well, one thing you left out is I actually started as a professor.
I did leave that out, yeah.
In universities. And that, in fact, has colored my approach ever since, certainly when I went into business and since, is just having that feeling that at a university, first of all, every year you get a whole new group of students coming in, so whatever you thought was acceptable and met the needs in one year, next year you've got to deal with it all over again. And so one aspect within the company was to two companies now and then since, has been that to make sure that you're very open to new ideas, to try to encourage it by having people come in, some academics who may be taking a year's break, just inviting other lecturers, just continue to steer the pot. So that was one way, one thing I immediately brought over from academic area. And the other, of course, is then how do you work individually, both with employees and with new people coming in and talking. And it's, in fact, when people always ask me what was the difference between academia and being in business, and obviously there are differences, my explanation always was that, well, half the time in academia and in business, able to do the technical kind of things. You have a problem, somebody's working on it, to come back, talk about it, redirect as needed, they go off, you continue to talk. The other half of your time at the university was meeting in committees, and half the time in business was taking care of all the other business activities. The main thing about the business side, you could make a decision.
Do you find that that lesson has served you well in your leadership in the philanthropic and civic arena as well?
Right, it's certainly on the philanthropic side, and looking again for projects where you might be able to make a difference in an area that's of interest. And then talking with the leadership in that project, kind of back and forth as to how best one might move ahead, and then continue to follow it, discuss it. So philanthropy in some sense takes almost as much time as a lot of other activities, but it's also quite fascinating. And again, you're able to interact with people in a whole range of different subjects.
Well, let's stay with philanthropy for a moment. In terms of your philanthropy, which has been simply extraordinary and defines so much of the landscape of San Diego today, you have invested in science, you've invested in students, you've invested in the arts, you've invested in education. And I'm curious to know what has guided your philanthropic vision.
Well, first of all, Joan and I always had, we made those decisions ourselves, and didn't have professional help in doing this, which was satisfying, but again, time-consuming, but worthwhile. And we, first of all, would look at projects, either someone would bring it to us, or we just, by looking around, become interested in it. Projects that involve, obviously, education. The fact we had scholarships, fellowships, help going through college would never have been where we ended up without that. So scholarships, fellowships have always been important. Another area was in education, was that we always had trouble finding enough American-born students as the companies began to grow rapidly that had the right background education. And so we also got involved a bit with the K-12 issues and the educational activities. And so that was important. But in also trying to bring new employees, attract new people to come to San Diego, you need to have not just good education, which is important, but good cultural activities, good things to be able to do around the city. And so supporting cultural activities was a very important aspect to us. And that's, of course, been particularly satisfying because it's one of those things you can both help and then go off and enjoy yourself and help your own living standards. And so that was it. So an area of interest, and then if we did support it, whether our support could make a difference. That is, if we didn't, perhaps it wouldn't be able to go ahead. And so that it was important to provide that support. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, that the project had good leadership, that there's a person that's going to make sure it's going ahead in a proper fashion and has the excitement and the ability to lead to make that a successful project.
In a way, you've begun to answer this question already, but I am curious about what you would say to other tech leaders about why it's important to invest in civic life. And I'm asking this in part because I was literally, before I walked into the room, was asked by a journalist about philanthropy in the technology sector and how it typically doesn't do that. So how do you think, how would you advise people in the tech arena to think about investing in civic life?
Well, the most important thing in business is the people that work with you. And so you want to do whatever you can to make sure that not only the job side is important, but there are other sides of life and family are important as well. And so having that right cultural activity is important. And so I often, well, it actually never happened. I always was prepared for a shareholder to come up to me and say, why are we providing company resources for charity rather than giving it back to the shareholders? And the answer was prepared to give was basically that it makes the people working for the company very proud of the company, proud of the city they're living in, less moved to go leave the company. And so it's a good way to keep employees enjoying the company and enjoying the environment around them.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I just want to call out that answer so reflects a community-minded spirit and a sense of corporate engagement to community that it just deserves to be honored and acknowledged, and we should applaud it. So I would love to hear you talk more about a project or initiative that really touched you or meant a significant amount to you.
Yeah, you have to be careful. That's more like which
Yeah,
child
I mean,
do
I
you
know.
prefer. But there was an interesting
Be careful
one.
in this room, I know.
It was actually building helping the Central Library, San Diego main library. And that was interesting in a couple of ways. One, that, in the digital age, is there any future for libraries? And is there a need to go to a library, take out a book, meet with others? Any case, so for a couple of years, when the issue had come up, maybe it was probably about a year, whenever we were traveling someplace, we'd visit the library in that city, and invariably, they were full of people. And so it was quite clear that even though the cell phone made a difference and the availability of digital information made a difference, people were still using libraries. And so we decided, yes, that's something, for whatever reasons, and a lot of things you do with libraries, that it was very important to continue that. And the second reason was that it would involve working with the city. And so a kind of a joint venture type of activity, which had its positives and occasionally its negatives, but things take a little longer, but in fact did work out very well. And so I thought that was a very good education for us also.
I absolutely love, I did not know that would be the answer. I love that that's the answer because I think it is so symbolic in many ways of libraries actually have been shown to be one of the places where community is still connecting and where people still come together in this very technological age that you help facilitate. So it's a beautiful thing. Thank you for that. I'm curious, as you, Irwin, think about San Diego's next chapter, what you think, well, and you are always reluctant to give advice and to tell people where to go, but as you think about the next chapter in this extraordinary city's story, what do you think we must protect and where must we evolve? What do we want to preserve and what do we want to change?
Well, it started out, again, as a very friendly city with a lovely environment. I think we built up a huge set of assets in the city. We still obviously have some significant problems, and I know that you've been working on those as well. But I think we have the possibilities of moving ahead in a variety of directions, giving the amount of education going on now in the city and the amount of people who are trained in a variety of areas available in the city. And so I think it's important that people continue to grow their business, start their business. And the question is often asked, which direction, which things should we be working on? And that's the part that's very hard. Started Linkabit to share consulting. Then it began to grow, and I would never have predicted a lot of the products that came out of Linkabit. Probably many of you didn't know. I will mention that one of those was the first actual use of the internet protocol that we had built for Opera. There was something called the ARPANET, and then we built a connection over to Europe by satellite with a different type network, and there was a kind of a predecessor of cell phones. And Opera came to us and said that could we use these three networks, which are each has different protocols, with this new algorithm that will allow them to work together. And so we did. When we ran the first data through these three networks back in, have to keep my decade straight here, it's 77. And didn't think very much of it, other than that was exciting. Yeah, it does work, and we didn't find any issues, et cetera. And forgot about it for 30 years, I guess it was. And the Computer History Museum up in the Bay Area suddenly got all of us back together to celebrate the 30th anniversary of that first use of the internet. So that was kind of a fun aspect. So some of these things you can't predict that you'll ever get into. The more recent one with Qualcomm, we started again without just knowing digital, wireless is of interest, but didn't have any products in mind. Luckily came up with the idea of CDMA very early, but had to put it off to one side because we didn't have the money to pursue it until we actually had the first sale of our OmniTrax, which was a truck communication product, and we could come back and pay attention. And we did, a lot of work and so on. I could never have predicted that one day one of the chips that came out of that work would power a helicopter on Mars. So you can never easily predict these things. When students say, what should I be studying to be prepared for this future? First, I always advise take some very good basic courses. Make sure you have your physics, your chemistry, your biology these days. Take some a little more deeply, but be open if you get a chance to go out and be part of a student group doing some project. That's always a very helpful way to go. But however you're preparing, this world is changing so rapidly and will continue to change so rapidly that you can't pick something and say that's going to be it. And so at some point when you get excited about something, work on it, and take advantage of the fact the world is changing. So take advantage of those changes to find something to be working on. But be prepared that whatever ideas you have, it's never going in a straight line. It's going to jig and jog. You're going to have to use what I call dynamic programming to work your way through the approaches to the company and be successful. And the other thing, although some schools teach, and Silicon Valley is a little different on this, teach it differently, I said the other important thing is don't fail. There's some advice that says fail once, come back, try again. By the third or fourth time, maybe you'll be successful. I prefer to kind of do the jigging and jogging until you can be successful.
And then you end up on Mars. I actually wanted to ask you, if you were starting off today, what one opportunity or issue would you want to be pursuing?
Well, again, when we started Qualcomm, started Linkabit, didn't have anything in mind, thought digital is important, wireless is important. I think both of those will continue to be important. Clearly the biology side is a whole additional set of possibilities. And so without knowing at any given time, be open to what's happening, go out and talk with people, read. You can never tell where ideas come up, where why is that not solved already? What might I be able to do about it? And then pursue that idea. But a very large one, as I touched on earlier, I think are senses, both that combine the wireless, the digital, and the biological, and sense the body, sense the environment, and use AI to be able to make a difference. The other area, and I did touch on as well, is robotics, and we're really moving very slowly in that area compared, for example, if you read about what's happening in China on how they're pursuing robotics, already have some very heavily use of robotics in the factories, but that they currently manufacture a high percentage of all the robots being made. And that's an area I think we need to go back to. And interestingly, there's the shortage we have probably here is of mechanical engineers. And given that we're going to be needing them, that's an area again to stress. I should also mention that engineering in general, a little sales here for engineering schools, but engineering in general is a great preparation for just about anything that you want to do. And that became clear to me when I came, even before business, when I came to UCSD, there were so few faculty at the time that when we set up a PhD committee, there weren't enough from the given department to staff those committees. And so you had the opportunity of going ahead and being on committees in economics, neuroscience, a whole range of areas that was not your own area. But you found that, at least I found that the engineering background was enough so I could participate and add some value to those discussions. So in general, engineering is very helpful.
I love that answer. I'm reflecting on the fact that I majored in history, and I wish I'd met you when I was younger. So before we wrap up, this room is full of current and future leaders in the space of working in innovation, in community, in trying to move San Diego forward in so many different ways. What advice do you want to share with this group, or words of encouragement would you want to share with this group?
First of all, if you have an interesting idea and you want to start a company or you want to expand your company, first of all, it's always important to find, as I mentioned earlier, very good people to work with. And they don't even necessarily have to have the background, as long as they're illustrated that they've been out, worked hard at something that was important to them, and now if you have an interesting job for them, they could be part of that. And so being able to find the right people to work with, be able to find set up an environment for them to work in and interact frequently so that some people kind of set a strategy but don't worry about the details. Some people worry about the details too much. And so you need the right balance there. You have to provide the right large direction, but also understand enough of the details so that you can make sure things are moving ahead on schedule, et cetera. And then go for it. And if you do come up with something that's going to make a change, be prepared for the fact that that change is affecting other people and other companies that may not appreciate this change you're trying to introduce. So be prepared for a few arrows in the back, and don't necessarily fight back. It's better to handle it by example. That is, you say this is a bad way to be going, et cetera. Well, I'll continue to pursue it and show over time it's the best way to go forward.
That is such a great answer. We're unfortunately out of time. Irwin, I just want to say Thank you so much for your vision, both as an entrepreneur, but also as a community leader, your generosity with this community, and your willingness to help translate those things into a changed reality for the rest of us. We are really lucky to have you in San Diego, so thank you.
Thank you. I think we're very lucky to have you here as well.